Today we talk to journalist, satirist, and geopolitical commentator Nury Vittachi. Hey everyone, I'm Jason Smith, originally from sunny California, now living in beautiful Beijing. Nury Vittachi is a well-known online for his humorous approach to surgically dissecting the geopolitical situation of the day. He is based in Hong Kong and is editor of FridayEveryday.com. Welcome back to the Bridge to China.
Hey Jason, always good to talk to you.
It's a delight. You have your own The Onion now with not the New York Times. I think it's delightful. I love watching you take apart everything that everyone is talking about in just the funniest kind of way. Let's get right to it. You used to work for some of the largest brands in Western media. Today you do satire under such monikers as not the New York Times. I wanted to ask you about your approach and what do you want people to take away from your jests about Western media? What are you trying to accomplish?
Well, you know, Western media has a stranglehold on the information sphere of the whole world. So it's very important that people have a little, what I call healthy skepticism in dealing with it. And that's absolutely important. It's like a vaccine, you know. You inoculate yourself against what Western media says. And so what I'm basically doing is by gently poking a bit of fun and trying to train people to just look beyond the headlines. So, I mean, let's face it, pretty much everything you read about Russia or China in Western media is not just unhelpful, but it's often the opposite of the truth. You know, in particular, you know, there was the hoax over the Uyghur genocide and things like that, and the description of the Hong Kong riots of 2019. You know, it was what the public were told was the opposite of the truth. So we can't bring down the Western media; they're too big. But what we can do is inoculate people so that they realize, hey, wait a minute, you know, we should take all this with a pinch of salt. And I think that's something we can do. We do have the power. And I think people have become healthily skeptical about the Western media. So, and I think you and I and other independent journalists have all contributed to that. It's important. Keep it up.
Well, I wanted to ask you, when I was a child, was I just, was it the same? Was Western media already like this bad, this inaccurate in its description of what was going on in the world? Or was it always this way? Did it become this way after a couple of decades? What has gone wrong with the way that Western media approaches reporting the reality on the ground?
That's a very good question. And I think to some extent it's both. Some branches of Western media were always deeply politicized and biased, whereas some were genuinely trying to be honest. So there's all sorts of things. I mean, there's lots of CIA involvement in Western media, and I remember when I was at the South China Morning Post, our man in Tokyo, eventually, I mean, he was always too busy to actually do his job. Eventually he said, look guys, I'm actually a CIA agent, pretending to be a journalist. You know, he's completely honest about it. And, you know, going back to my main job now. So, like, you know, okay.
Wow.
I mean, there were lots like that. My father worked for a UK newswire years and years ago. And they eventually said, look, we're actually a CIA operation. And my father resigned. So the journalism is full of agents, CIA, MI6. I worked for the Far East Economic Review, and there were lots of rumors about the senior staff there as being linked to British intelligence. And when that individual eventually retired, he said, those rumors, they were true. So, you know, it's... it's completely penetrated, infiltrated by MI6 and CIA. But having said that, if you look back in the files, you can find some honest reporting. So there were real reporters. I mean, I came across an article from 1996 recently, which said quite clearly MI6 and CIA are working with a group in Xinjiang to create trouble for China. And this was, Western piece of writing, and it quite clearly identified the the small but problematic independence element in Xinjiang with the West, with London and Washington. And so that's honest, that's the truth. Today, you'd never see that. Today, the whole narrative has been changed, sort of like, oh, the evil Chinese are hurting the minorities, and we, the West, must stand up for the minorities. The whole narrative has been switched, but look back in history, and you can find the truth there in Western media.
Wow, that is a lot to take in. I guess I'm not sure if I can answer. You were able to answer my next question because the answer that you gave was so comprehensive. But I was going to ask, can Western media rebuild itself to be trustworthy again? But given its infiltration by deep state actors from major Western institution, it seems unlikely. But do you think so? Do you think it's possible for mainstream media to become factually accurate to the truth again?
Yeah, I don't think so, but I do think that we can make it behave. So, for example, about a year ago, I published the results of a very detailed study by a university in Hong Kong and a university in London, showing statistically just how biased certain newspapers, certain news outlets were. They covered The Guardian, The Economist, The Financial Times, and a few others. And I've noticed since that was published, since that survey was published, they've started to behave a bit. The survey showed very clearly that there were almost no neutral or positive articles about China in those publications. And now about once a month you will see neutral or positive articles. So they obviously think, wait, if they do that study again, we want to look like we've improved. So so I think we are keeping them in line. And then of course there's the growth of the independent media. For UK there's one called Novara. In the US there's the Grey Zone. And so on. At Hong Kong, we've got tiny little Friday media. So bit by bit, the independent voices are climbing up, and we're replacing them. And occasionally we get big hits. Now, obviously, the BBC is going to get more hits than Friday media, right? But, we had one a couple of weeks ago that got 1.6 million views. So we do occasionally get the big scores. And, our YouTube channel has probably had maybe 9-10 million views. And our social media channels have had more than that. So we're slowly getting those big numbers. So let's keep at it.
Yeah, well, that goes back to your point about inoculation. The virus may be everywhere, but, if you're inoculated, all you need is a small amount for your body to recognize what shouldn't be there.
Exactly. Well said.
You wrote an article in July entitled, U.S. Moves Slowly Towards Planned War with China, which alarmed me because, I'm an American in China. My life depends on there not being a conflict. We both know Elbridge Colby and others have said that they want to prevent a war through projecting American military strength in the Pacific, whatever they call it now, Indo-Pacific or Asian Pacific. I'm concerned, if the U.S. is sleepwalking towards a conflict with China, what should we be paying attention to right now?
It's funny. The official line is prevent war by arming everybody. But clearly, that's an absurdity. And also, Elbridge Colby is pushing that line. But he himself wrote a book just a few years ago pushing for war with China. Using Taiwan, exploiting Taiwan as the justification. So it's for those of us who've been following this story for a while, it's pretty funny to see him, try to argue the other way. But also you can see what's going on, step by step. There's an island called Bataan, north of the Philippines and south of Taiwan Island, and they've turned it into a warship harbor, very clearly. There's a study going on. Which beaches in Asia can we use as takeoff strips for jet fighters? There's a study, there's work going on right now. Washington Post reported about it last week, saying that Palau has Chinese and Americans on board, on that island. The Chinese are building a hotel for tourists to employ the locals, and the Americans are building a warship harbor. So these practical steps they've been taken all the time. A few months ago, I did a video, 28 steps, which the US has taken towards war.
Wow.
That was only a few months ago, but now I could make it a list of 36 or 40 steps. These are practical steps: building warship harbors, building jet fighter runways. So they're progressing very strongly with this plan to start war with China. I know Glenn Deason. He did an interview with a professor called Einar Tangen. Yeah, very good man. And he said, the worry is we're looking at all this trade war stuff, but, it's not going well for America. It's not going well for Trump. And he can just play the military card. He'd say, okay, military action tends to unite the Americans and tends to get a positive boost for the president's ratings. So he can literally just go hard, send in the bombers if he wants to boost his ratings. And of course, that's a worry. I mean, who wants a war just to boost Trump's ratings? But you saw what happened in Iran. These ratings went up when he broke international law by attacking a sovereign nation without justification or any UN resolution. So naughty boy, but it works for him. That's the worry.
Well, we are peace activists along with a lot of our associates online. Obviously, a conflict between China and the United States could be, world-ending, actually. I mean, if we really look at it, we could be looking at the end of humanity. So, or maybe even life on this planet. So what can regular folks do to prevent such an outcome? People like you and me, or just like anyone?
I think we need to take a break from normal activities like, loading up stuff to TikTok or spending time watching sitcoms, and just occasionally stand up for what's important. What's important is, climate change. What's important is avoiding war. What's important is building bridges between nations. And I think we can all stand for that. We can all say, look, we stand against the destruction of our planet. We stand against war. We stand against militarization. And one thing that worries me a lot, I just spent time in Europe, is that every single European country, 27 nations, plus the UK, all of them are diverting public funds from public services to buying weapons, mostly from the US. All of them, all 27 of them. So that's clearly the wrong way to go. And if you look at public surveys, the European public are lovely. I just want to hug them all. They're great. British people too are just absolutely lovely to talk to. But their governments, their media are just terrible. They're just terrible. They're just hungry to spend money on weapons. They're just hungry to divert funds from where they're needed, like healthcare, education, towards financing weapons. And it's also unnecessary. Europeans are all being told that Russia's about to invade. Russia's not about to invade Europe. Of course it's not. It's been struggling to take a little slice of Ukraine. It's not going to invade Europe. And they keep saying that China's about to take over the world. It's not trying to take over the world. But fear-mongering works. That's what we've seen in the media.
Well, it does. It's very unfortunate. So, I noticed there's been a few different surveys circulating in the last 2 months or so that show that the United States is falling out of favor with the international community. And I mean the actual international community, not just the G7. What's going on? Why is the world starting to look at the United States differently than it did, say, after 1991?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's partly true, but it's mostly based on those Pew surveys. And if you look at the small print in the Pew surveys, they talk about the world, but it's nearly all Western countries, and and then they add in Singapore and Malaysia. So the world is Western countries plus Singapore and Malaysia. So, of course, for years and years, they've said, oh, the world hates China. But, if you can ask only Western countries, countries which have been propagandized, up to here, clearly they're going to say that. Now, even Western countries are thinking, wait a minute, maybe China's not the good guy and the US is not the China's not the bad guy and the US is not the good guy. They're starting to, that healthy skepticism we talked about is starting to come in, and a more reasonable view of the world is starting to emerge. I think it's always been there. If you actually go to Singapore and talk to people, you go to China, you go to India and talk to people, they've always had a more sophisticated view of the world than the Western media pretends, Western media is reductive. So, my favorite headline, and it keeps coming out, is China is angry. As if all of China is like one cross person, China is angered by da-da-da-da-da. No, China will be angry at such and such. So there's more than one guy in China, It's hilarious.
I think that's a really good point, actually. A lot, even when after 2 or 3 years of living in China, I was still thinking about China as this monolithic place, and then traveling around China just completely changed my perspective. There's so much difference in China. There's so much. So yeah, what is China thinking? It's ludicrous. I wanted to ask this question because I get a lot of people with different ideas about why the U.S. is losing favorability. Is it because of Trump? Is it because of Gaza? Is it because of the United States sending weapons to a country that is conducting war crimes that the entire world is watching? What do you think is going on? Why is support for the United States really kind of rapidly declining right now?
Yeah. Well, I think it's all those things you mentioned, plus one more, which is that realism is setting in. The public is becoming more sophisticated. The chattering classes are starting to realize, hey, wait a minute, there's something going on here. The Americans are not the good guys here. I think as a lot of information comes out about Western black ops, then people start to think, well, maybe those people who say that the US is stirring up things in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, maybe they're right. Maybe the critics are right. So, yeah, realism is spreading among the peoples of the world. And, of course, all those things you mentioned, Gaza, the general militarism of the West, the general desperation of the West is coming up. And, of course, we've got the voices. We mentioned Professor Tangent. There's also Jeffrey Sachs, who's a great friend of Friday Media. Thank you, Jeffrey. People like that. Richard Wolff is another one who is speaking out and going viral. So that really helps all of us. You can find them on TikTok even. It's great.
Yeah, I love watching Richard Wolff. He's fantastic, and I had the wonderful opportunity to speak with Dr. Sachs a couple times. He's incredibly insightful, and I love the fact that his answers are always unexpected. I always frame a question because I expect a particular kind of answer, but Jeff, his thinking is a whole other level. He's a brilliant person. Einar also, yeah. I've had the chance to talk with him. He's also a very brilliant person, and of course yourself and many of the other guests that we get to have on here. But we are also looking, in addition to the decline of world opinion towards the United States, we're looking at positive views of China increasing globally, which, I'm delighted because I want there to be peace. I mean, that is my thesis. I want there to be peace. If I had to boil down everything that I'm doing online or in books or whatever to one single thing, there should be peace. And, understanding China is critical to that because the West is framing China as some sort of villain. So why, in your opinion, do you think the world is starting to view China more favorably now?
There are things you can't avoid. Like you see the BYD cars all over Europe. You see Leap Motor and obscure Chinese companies popping up in UK and other places. You see the price of solar panels, drop through the floor. You see the statistics from companies like analytic companies like Ember showing China's contribution towards the Green Revolution. So you can't avoid these. These are facts. These are statistics. You can't talk your way out of these. And for years, the Western media, the only comment they'd make about China is that China is the world's biggest emitter. But the FT printed a letter by me saying, well, that's absurd because clearly you need to mention that on a per capita basis is actually not even in the top 10. So, the FT printed that letter. And so voices are starting to share these other truths, which paint a very different picture. So, and people are less political, I think, than journalists, ordinary people on the street. So, whereas journalists will try and politicize everything. I mean, there's a funny case last week, an absurd case where there was a bullying incident in China, right? Now, extreme bullying happens in every city in the world, in every country in the world. It just is there. Occasionally someone catches it on video and it goes viral, right? But the AFP report on that extreme bullying case was absurd. It said, basically, there are protests which you never find in China because of an extreme bullying case. Why does extreme bullying happen? Because of the high pressure put on young people in China. So everything was politicized. And, it's not just absurd, it's factually wrong. The high suicide rates among students are in South Korea and Japan, not so much in China, not in Hong Kong. So AFP pushing the wrong data, politicizing a case that shouldn't be politicized. I mean, AFP is based in France, right? In every city in France there's bullying. So this politicization of everything, I think that's a journalistic sin. But I don't think ordinary people do that. I don't think ordinary people politicize everything. I think the average person would say, oh, bullying case in China doesn't matter. There's bullying cases everywhere. We need to stop bullying in every country, in every city. I think ordinary people are more interested in the latest TikTok dance or, the favorite movie star of the moment. They're less politicized than the journalists, thank God.
I really like that you see humanity. I guess you have a lot more length of time reading news, analyzing news, participating in news than I do. Sometimes I read so much news that I get trapped in that chamber, and I think, oh, this is public opinion. And clearly, I think your optimism about the general public is really needed because I think you're right. Yeah, like it's not just what the news is saying. That's not what people are thinking. That's what they wish people were thinking, but that's not actually what people are thinking. And that's a very positive thing to take away. Yeah, and right now, I guess I just want to stay on this question for a moment. Right now, there's a lot of positive news coming out of China, like you mentioned. It's not just BYDs and solar panels, but it's like the beautiful cities that are being developed, the end of extreme poverty. Does poverty still exist in China? Yeah, of course. No one says that poverty doesn't exist, but extreme poverty, starvation level poverty is gone from China. That is incredible. It may be one of the most important stories of our lifetime, not just because not just because of the eradication of extreme poverty in China. What does that mean for what's possible for the rest of the world also? I mean, it's so incredibly positive, and I think that people, like you say, they're looking at the whole picture of China that they're getting. And a lot of the smaller media or the influencers, iShowSpeed, these kinds of other media that are coming into people's perspectives are seasoning, like with salt, like you like to say, all of the other media that comes from official outlets, which are, obviously painting China in a very bizarre kind of way. And I think people are getting, like you said, maybe more realistic human perspective of what's actually going on in China, I hope. Let's talk about, you posted a video of Richard Wolff, who we just talked about, and he was explaining that the era of U.S. economic dominance is over. Actually, I might want to follow up this question with some more questions because I think about this a lot. What do you make of China's economy in this context? How is China's economy actually doing, in your opinion?
Yeah. It's clearly struggling. It's been growing very fast, and now it's still growing. 5% is a very good score by any measure, but there are areas where it's struggling, and I think it can be explained by the size of China. Obviously, there are going to be sectors which are struggling while other sectors boom. There are going to be physical, geographical areas which are struggling while other sectors boom. So, when we're talking about China, it's like talking about all of Europe plus all of Eastern Europe. So there are places where China is struggling, and there are places where it's doing really well. So what happens is that if you get Bloomberg or something, Bloomberg will always put a negative spin. So it's like, oh, China, economic disaster. Whereas I think more honest sources will say, well, it's mixed. Some sectors are doing very, very well. Some sectors are struggling. I think so. There's both things going on. It's a very big, complex picture. I think overall, though, with GDP growth at 5%, that's got to be great, right? The Europeans are at 1% or less in many cases. The UK is less than 1%. US growth is about 2.5%. So all of them are doing less well than China. So it's hard to point the finger at China and saying you're the one who is suffering economic downturn when the people saying this are suffering much worse economic downturn. So let's be honest, guys, especially you guys at Bloomberg. No, be a bit balanced, please.
I wanted to talk about this in the context of multipolarity, which among a lot of people is extremely popular, especially around the idea of BRICS. And I have a mixed feelings about this idea that we are entering into a new multipolar world. Because I love the optimism. I want there to be a multipolarity so different nations could hold each other to account. And it does seem like economically the developing world is doing better than it was, and there's more balance. And I guess what troubles me is we have what we call an international community. We have the United Nations. We have tools like BRICS, like the G7, like the G20, like all these other institutions. However, the United States is sending weapons to Israel, and Israel is clearly committing crimes against humanity, and the international community is incapable of holding a small nation to account. And I feel like if we're in a multipolar world, wouldn't there be a better ability to pressure a large actor like the United States into stopping? Because it feels like I have trouble accepting the possibility that we're really in a multipolar world when we can't hold a superpower like the United States to account. Are we in a multipolar world, or are we moving towards a multipolar world? What's your opinion?
It might be happening because Lula of Brazil has contacted Modi of India, and they're also talking to China and Russia. So basically, the BRICS leaders at this moment, I think Modi has called for an emergency meeting of the BRICS. And Lula's argument is we make 40% of GDP around the world. US makes 20% of GDP. What if we tariff the US? Wow. Okay, this is a very clever trick because people have missed the fact, and Professor Tangent pointed this out, that the US is the world's second largest exporter. We always think, oh, China is the world's exporter. The US is the world's second largest exporter. And if the BRICS countries, or the world in general, tariffs the US, then, wow, everything changes. Everything changes. So the US
that is fascinating.
Yeah, the US has isolated itself to some extent. And if the BRICS then tariffs the US, it'll be completely isolated. So that multipolar thing, I think many people share your anxiety that why is the multipolar world not doing too much? It may be happening. I don't know if there's a date for a specific meeting, but the leaders of the BRICS are definitely discussing how they can stop Trump damaging world trade and also damaging America. I mean, everybody needs America. America's very important. It's not just a good customer, it's a good producer. It needs to be America needs to be built into the world trading system. And,
Mm.
there's so much good about America. I mean, I love American music. I love American movies. I love British novels. I mean, the West produces so much wonderful, wonderful stuff. We need to integrate it happily into the world economy. So hopefully that's happening.
Well, I used to work in the corporate world. The way I like to think about it is the United States needs its power projection needs to be right sized, which is something they like to say in the corporate world. It's like maybe it's a little imbalanced right now. Um, we asked you about Hong Kong a couple times the last time we had you on the show. A lot of the responses, I have a friend from Hong Kong, Morris. He would just loved it. He called me. He was like, "Wow, that was amazing. I wish you would do that more often." But we're clear of the pandemic now, and I really want to get your perspective. How is Hong Kong's economy finally shaping up now that we're kind of like in a sort of normal period in economic development globally?
I mean, it's interesting. It's mixed. Some sectors are suffering. The integration is good and bad. So, for example, you can now just hop on a metro and go to Shenzhen, where the prices are much cheaper. So, of course, that's bad for Hong Kong shopkeepers and restaurants. But Hong Kong's biggest industry is finance. And on the IPO charts, Hong Kong is back to number one. Overtaken London long time ago, overtaken New York, NASDAQ. So IPOs in Hong Kong are easily number one in the world. So that's good. That's important because, as I say, finance is the biggest industry in Hong Kong. Other sectors, though, are suffering a bit. Property market is down, as Bloomberg keeps reminding us. But that's good news because for literally decades, the financial analysts have said property is overpriced. So now it's going down. That's clearly a positive thing. I was chairing a public event a few weeks ago, and when we came to questions from the audience, the public was saying we need to integrate more. How can we integrate faster with China? China's doing so well with with so many products, with general growth. We need to integrate faster with China. And I was thinking, this is the Hong Kong public saying let's have more integration with China. That's not the impression that the Western media gives about the Hong Kong public, right? The Western media likes to give the impression that the Hong Kong public is very anti-mainland China, anti those Mandarin speakers across the border. But no, the public was saying, how can we integrate faster? China's become cool. We want to become part of the cool country. There were one or two voices. There was one voice who said, it was a businessman, who said, will integration hurt Hong Kong, though, because prices here are high and China's prices are lower, so prices will fall. But the other people told him, no, that's how business works. Arbitration is normal. And it doesn't mean that all your investments will suddenly halve in price. It means some healthy exchanges will be going on and business will get better, be more competitive. So it's always painful. Integration is always painful for a while, but ultimately benefits everyone. It's competitiveness is the keystone of capitalism, right? So as a capitalist city, Hong Kong will benefit ultimately from integration with mainland China, and that's what we're seeing. A season of pain, but it'll come back. It's on the way back now.
I'd like to ask you a couple questions more about Hong Kong, specifically. Well, I want to frame it differently. When China was starting to take on market reforms, one of the things that China did was develop special economic zones, like Shenzhen, Shanghai, and several others. Actually, they're everywhere. Practically every city I go to China, I see a giant sign that says that it's a special economic zone now of some kind. And more than anywhere else, Hong Kong kind of really is this really special economic zone because in a way it was divided for so long. And now it plays a very special role in not just in China, but also in Asia and the world. I mean, people point out New York, London, and Hong Kong when they're talking about the major financial hubs of the world. Can you talk a little bit about what makes Hong Kong a special especially economically? What are its advantages, and how does that help Asia, help China, or help the world?
Yeah, I mean, Hong Kong really is a bridge between two worlds. So, for example, I mean, the great superconnector ability of Hong Kong really started in the late 80s, where people would set up offices in a fancy building in the middle of Hong Kong skyscraper, and businessmen would arrive from all over the world and say, um, I want 10,000 widgets. And the Hong Kong businessman would say, okay, what are you paying now? I can get it to you for one third of the price. And the Western businessman would look round, and there's this fancy office in this buzzing city, and he'd feel a lot of trust. So this feels like the West. This feels like a modern democracy. So he'd say, okay. And the guy would just say, let me just call the guys at the factory. Can you do me 10,000 widgets by next week? And he's actually calling, of course, his factory in China, where the prices were low and they could do 10,000 widgets in a week. So that kind of super connector ability has always been there. And I don't know if you've ever been to the Canton Trade Fair, but
I have
it's
not.
hilarious.
I have not.
It's hilarious to see the clever businesses that happen there. So they'll put out on the table all sorts of random items, and someone will come along and say, "Oh, I rather like this. Can you make this for me?" And in fact, it's something they've never made before. So they say, "Yes, of course, we can give you 10,000 of these." And then they'd start looking for a factory that can make 10,000 of these. You know, so very, very fast moving. I can give you an example from my own life. A few days ago, we had a plumbing problem, and you've been watching a TV show called Taskmaster, set in UK, a TV show from UK, and the contestants were challenged, do a miracle. Your time starts now. So each contestant had to do a miracle. And one of them said, I'll do a miracle. I'll call a plumber and have him come and fix something. Because in UK, it takes weeks to get a plumber into your house. So he managed to persuade a plumber to come to the place where the show is being filmed, saying, look, it didn't take me 3 weeks. That was a miracle. Now, a plumbing problem we had here in my house, and I went to the local plumbing shop and said, I've got a problem in my house over there. And what happened? The plumber came home with me and fixed the problem on the spot. So, yeah, Hong Kong's Asian Western mix is definitely a plus, an important thing.
Wow, that is quite remarkable. Actually, my follow-up question is this: in 2047, Hong Kong's status is going to change, but I really don't know how it is. Because China benefits enormously from Hong Kong's special status. Based on what you know about politics in Hong Kong and how things are developing, how do you think Hong Kong is likely to change or not change in 2047?
Actually, I can answer that question very accurately because I've spoken to the people who are in charge of that operation.
Wow.
And they decided already several years ago that the key element to this was whether the laws will change in terms of ownership and property and so on. And they decided to make a decision. We said must make a decision now. And they decided they would keep those laws. And Beijing approved. So basically, all property contracts signed in recent years have gone past 2047. And they've gone right up to 2050, 2060, 2070, and so on. People are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on land, on factories, on commercial properties that go beyond 2047. And the contracts stretch right through that. So that guarantees that there will be no change. The British common law will be maintained, and property contracts will be re-signed to go past that. So that's all decided already. There's going to be no change in terms of of the law, no change in terms of business. So it's going to be smooth sailing. We won't even notice the difference. I'm quite confident about that. It's a through train. That's the phrase that they use. So no problem for 2027.
Now that you say that, that actually makes a lot of sense, because obviously Beijing wouldn't want there to be a hiccup or concerns or people to FDI to decrease because people don't know what's going to happen. So addressing it early actually makes an enormous amount of sense. That's what you get with a bunch of technocrats in charge. In your view, what are some of the biggest misunderstandings that you see about Asia and China in particular? That you see in media, that you see in social media, that you just see in people?
Yeah, one of the biggest problems is sourcing. People don't people don't give the sources of their information in the international media. I mean, just to give you an example, the Times of London constantly quotes an organisation called IPAC. The Alliance on China, based in the UK, without mentioning that it's financed by the NED, National Endowment for Democracy. I mean, clearly that would change people's view. So, the Times of London quotes from this organisation all the time. The guy who runs it, a guy called Luke de Pulford, absolutely hates China, xenophobe up to here. But they quote him all the time without mentioning it's a US-financed organisation which was set up by the NED, and that would change people's view. So that's what people need to know. They need to know who's financing the people creating problems for China. There's another article from that group this morning in the Times, and generally speaking, the NED's standard technique is to go into a country, find out which group is pro-Washington, and then have that labelled pro-democracy. And you can see, if you look at NED records over the years, you can find that sometimes they choose one that does seem to be pro-democracy. Sometimes they choose one which is clearly anti-democracy, and sometimes they choose a body which is far-right fascist. And they say, oh, okay, those guys are pro-democracy. And what they really mean is pro-Washington. That's very clear in Hong Kong. I mean, in 2019, we saw groups of thugs going into 90 different metro stations and setting them on fire and burning them. And what did the Western media say? Oh, these groups are pro-democracy. They were clearly not pro-democracy. They're clearly fascist thugs trying to burn down metro stations. Nobody could call that democracy. But because they're labelled, because they're pro-Washington, they're labelled pro-democracy. And that's what we have to fix. We have to get people to source things. Now, at the moment, the Western media won't do that. So we have to do it. So every time The Guardian says, oh, this terrible thing happened in Hong Kong, this terrible thing happened in Beijing, we have to say, yes, and everybody you're quoting in that article is financed by the CIA, the NED, or the MI6, and here are the financial details, and here's how much money the NED gave them this year. So give them the facts. The NED has been financing projects in Beijing since 1983. In fact, the NED was started in 1983, and its very first target was China, and its very first grant was against Beijing. And then in 1989-90, they moved to Hong Kong, and they've been financing anti-China projects from Hong Kong since 1990. That's 35 years, and literally hundreds of millions of dollars. So when you see pro-democracy activists here, don't think, oh, poor little Hong Kong youth. Think that is the NED.
I love your grit and resilience because we have to do this so many times for the same exact issue over and over online sometimes. It gets frustrating. A lot of people like to quote Wikipedia at me about China, and I have to go and find like 4 or 5 articles that show, yes, Wikipedia has been groomed by the CIA for decades, and it just feels like I have to do this once every couple weeks, like over and over and over. It's like nonstop education process, helping people understand that the information that they're processing has been filtered through a very specific lens, and it can take a lot out of a person having to teach the same lessons so frequently. But yeah, thank you for the work that you do. How do you see Hong Kong's unique position as shaping perspectives on Sino-U.S. relations?
I mean, Hong Kong is a people do like to visit Hong Kong, and the tourist numbers are up again. And I think for those people who you can't persuade with words, you can persuade with images. We show images of China, images of Hong Kong. That helps. And of course, there are the visitors. You know, you come to Hong Kong, and for years this has happened. People have come to Hong Kong and say, well, this feels like a really safe democracy, and it's technically not a democracy. And now people are saying the same thing about Shanghai and Beijing. You go there and say, this feels like a really safe, well-managed, happy place. And that really helps. I mean, we had a young man in visiting Friday last year, and he was a British guy. He toured all over Asia, you know, young man, backpacking on the road. And he specifically avoided Hong Kong because he said, oh, bad guys, bad guys. I bet there were bad guys there. And then he went home. He fell in love with a Hong Kong girl and came back to Hong Kong with her. He fell in love with the place immediately, and he's still here. That was last year. So you can see that an extremely brainwashed individual can be converted by coming and seeing the truth of themselves. Unfortunately, we can't get the entire world's population and bring them to Hong Kong, bring them to China, and show them, look, see for yourself. We have to do it through our little efforts in the media, and that's why the little efforts that you and I make, Jason, are really important, so that we can try and make that change happen.
Yeah, you point out a really good point. You know, one of the things that's happened in Chinese mainland is enormous amounts of tourists have come in because of visa-free policies for dozens and dozens of countries. And you just see these delightful perspectives on social media from these individuals traveling around China. And the real sad thing is, you know, if you're in the United States, you know, and you're in the lower or middle class, you really can't afford to travel globe trotting. So even though a 1 week visit or even just 2 days in China would completely revamp or change someone's perspective from the West, for most people it's not realistic to expect them to be able to travel to China. So that will continue to be a frustrating problem with people who are not able to see and believe, which would be just ideal. Let's move forward a little bit because we're running out of time. How do you think cultural perspectives shape political attitudes in Sino-U.S. relations? I really ask this because there is such an initiative called the Global Civilization Initiative. And that is appreciation, celebration for different global civilizations that has been initiated from here in China. But I've been to a couple of forums, one in Chufu. And I love culture, and I studied culture in university, and I appreciate culture, but I'm wondering how, when I think about culture, I'm thinking Beijing opera or something. How can appreciation of one another's cultures really help, you know, develop international peace, is my question, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's really important. Culture is the answer, because culture is fun. And talking about politics is often not very fun. It's often very depressing. Whereas, you know, a really good sports event can have you on the edge of your seat. A really good music event can be amazing. And like some of the dance events in China are just mind-blowing. So I think culture is the way ahead. We can bypass all this political unpleasantness by saying, okay, you have your own political view, but watch this video. And there's, you know, a young person doing something amazing, and you think, wow, that was worth watching. You know, there was one just this week where a young person from USA did a jump. He did 3 forward jumps, twisted, and did 4 backwards jumps. You know, and it was amazing off a small trampoline. And he was a US guy, and the Chinese guys were cheering for him. And it was just lovely US-China togetherness over a sports achievement. because the ultimate message for all of us is humanity rocks. You say that peace is your ultimate goal, and that's fantastic. And we can get there by celebrating humanity as a whole. We all love great sports. We all love human achievement. We all love great music. We all love great art. Now, Chinese are making movies and things, they've got a way to catch up, to get up there with Disney and Pixar and all these, but they're slowly getting there, and it's important. So artists tend to be more tolerant, more open-minded. So I think art and sports, culture generally, that's the way that the world is going to come together.
I want to pick your mind because you were so seasoned at being an advocate for peace. So let's just say you had unlimited funds, or $50 million or something like that. If you could design one, West China project to promote peace, and you could do, pretty much anything you wanted, you had carte blanche, what would you do?
Yeah, that's interesting. Something like TikTok, if it was managed fairly, that would be a good answer. And TikTok used to be managed fairly. Now, unfortunately, you have some very problematic people. With social media, what the West tends to do is to say, we'll ban it unless you put our people. And then they put CIA and APAC people in there to distort it. But culture is the answer. TikTok is great because it's creative. So, for example, a group from Africa can do a cool dance and it can go viral. A group from China can do a cool dance, it can go viral. It doesn't need to be a studio with big money. So the team at TikTok, the ByteDance team in Beijing, I think they did a great job. They're still doing interesting things. CapCut, for example, is the #1 filmmaking program. There's the #1 video AI program is called Seed Dance, also by ByteDance. So you can see that creative people with a bit of money can produce art and culture that unites the world. Everybody's using TikTok. Everyone's using Seed Dance. Everyone is using CapCut. These are #1 in their areas. So, yeah, bit of money, bit of culture, bit of creativity, and we can bring the world together.
I don't know how many people know this about you, but you've written, 20 books? A lot of books. A lot of them are also children's books. I wanted to follow up on your writing. The last time I talked to you, you were producing books about quantum mechanics for children. So I wanted to ask you, what are you working on these days? What's the next big project coming out by Nury Vittachi?
Right. I've left the children's books, and I wrote a series of detective novels. I've left all those behind for a little while. I'm writing a book at the moment called Interference, which is just putting down very clearly facts, figures, numbers of what the US has been doing in Hong Kong and the region. Names, dates, times, amounts, clearly written in details, because I think it will be useful. And all through the book, there's footnotes and citations. So no one can say, oh, you're pro-China, you're making this up, because you can check the links yourself. Also, I'm telling the story from the first grants in 1983 right up to today. And during most of that time, I was a very much anti-China journalist. So I was approving all these things. I was sort of saying, yeah, more money to the anti-China crew. Give it to us. So I was on the bad guys' side then. And eventually I had realized, wait, something's very wrong here. So that will be my next project. Probably come out maybe end of this year or early next year. So I'm well on the way with that one. So watch out for it.
I will. I'm looking forward to that enormously. I hope I can get a copy in Chinese mainland. If I can't, I will get a copy mailed to my family in the United States and have them send me a copy here, because that sounds delightful. I hope we're able to quote a sentence or two here and there online, because that sounds like it would be excellent ammunition.
Right. Definitely, it'll be useful for everybody. I think anybody who's interested in the truth rather than the narrative.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Nury Vittachi.
Jason, always great to talk to you. Look forward to the next time.